We get hungry, we get thirsty, and we get that yearning on the inside for things of God's good gifts. So the first thing we want to talk about tonight is about the hunger for wisdom. Now, we've all had those moments, those times when you wonder, what is life all about? Where is the meaning for me? And often it happens that when there's a major change in our life situation, we rethink what our purposes are and what the meaning is all about. It's not always so easy. I found a great cartoon in a book. I didn't get a chance to copy it for you. Let me describe it. There's the mountain with the guru who sits on top of the mountain, who's been contemplating all of life and is wise and knows all the answers. And then there's this hiker with a backpack who finally climbs to the top of the mountain, seeking wisdom and asking that deep, eternal question, what's it all about? And the caption for the cartoon is this. The hiker says, "You mean you put your right foot in and your left foot out and you do the hokey pokey and that's what it's all about?" We often get nonsensical answers to our searches for wisdom. But it is an age-old thing. And it is a hunger for us deep inside to know how we grow and how this gift of God, which is wisdom, and one of the promises of God, that if we ask for wisdom, He will grant it. Now tonight we will finish our whole series on talking about the kings of Israel. We started out with Saul, the first king, who failed in following God's statutes. His line was discontinued. David became the new king, and God promised there would always be a king from David's line on the throne, and we see that true in Jesus Christ, because He is of that line and lineage. And now we get to the time when David is dying. He is dying of old age. He has had a long life. He has been king for 40 years, and it is time for him to lay down his leadership. Before his death, David summons his son Solomon, the son of Bathsheba, the woman that he brought into his palace, this very beautiful son that he favored. He had many other sons as well, and several other sons who wanted to be king. But David was sure that Solomon was God's choice. And so before David died, he laid aside his crown and had Solomon anointed as king and proclaimed king, who took authority in Jerusalem. As our story in the scriptures said tonight, David slept with his ancestors, and Solomon, his son, is the new king. Solomon is now beginning to reign on this great and numerous people of the chosen people of God. It's a big responsibility. It's a tremendous task to govern this people that God has chosen to be His instrument of showing the godness of Yahweh to the whole world. They were picked and chosen for a mission to let God be visible in the world to all people. So Solomon is trying to follow in his father's footsteps. A palace has been built for the king, but no house has yet been built for God. And at this time, Solomon has many wives from different places, all part of peace treaties from various places. And he goes to worship and to offer sacrifices to Yahweh God on many of the high places that have been sacred, but not to Yahweh. There has not been a worship place that is dedicated solely to Yahweh God. Now, if you caught some things in the lesson that Evelyn read just a little bit, Solomon was rich. When he made sacrifices, which was important, he would offer 1,000 oxen or bulls for the offering. Now that's a huge amount. Most of the ordinary people that lived in the country were able to offer maybe a lamb, sometimes a pair of doves, if you were really well off, a ram. But the richness of Solomon and his generosity and his gratitude to God and the fact that he walked with God and wanted to offer back to God his gratitude, he offered 1,000 bulls at a time. God was pleased with Solomon's heart. God was pleased with Solomon's stewardship. And as we heard in the story, God said, Solomon, what can I give you as a gift? And Solomon woke from the dream as God had spoken to him. And he thought, God is going to give me a gift. What am I hungry for? What I want? And I challenge you to think for a moment, if God wakes you in the middle of the night with a dream that says, what is your wish? I will give it to you. Do you know what you would ask? Do you know what you are hungry for? What does your soul yearn for at its deepest place? If God could give you anything that your heart desires? Solomon could have had anything. So he goes to the place of worship. And in thanksgiving and prayer, he says, Lord, I'm hungry for wisdom. Hungry for a wisdom so that I can be a good king and rule this your great people. It's a big responsibility. I don't know if I can do it. I don't know that I can do it apart from you, God. And I need your wisdom. And I need the gift of wisdom to be able to be king of your people. Wouldn't that be extraordinary if our elected leaders would ask for the wisdom of God or that higher power that they may believe in or the creator of the universe and say, how can I govern according to your purposes? We have many people of different faith traditions, and I don't mean to try to put it in one category. But when we follow that tradition that we know, when we follow what our heart says, when we yearn for that truth and that wisdom of God, it changes everything. And God said, yes, I will give you wisdom. And Solomon is the one who has the reputation for the greatest wisdom of any elected leader. He was also given by God because of his request to do a good job in what he was called to do. He was also given riches beyond what he already had, a reputation of fame, and an ability to command others in a way that would be for their benefit and peace. God satisfied that hunger for wisdom. Now Solomon used his wisdom in powerful ways. He had a practical sense of it all, and sometimes even a sense of humor. You may remember a story about Solomon and his wisdom when two young mothers came to him. It was right after this event. And the two young mothers had both given birth within 3 days to brand new babies. They were rivals. They lived in the same household, but they were always in competition with one another. And sadly, one of the baby boys died. They came squabbling to the king because they both claimed that the living child was their own and that the child who had died belonged to the other mother. And there was no one to witness whose was whose. So Solomon hears their cries. Solomon hears their dilemma. They each want this live baby that they love so much. and each is claiming to be the mother. Solomon, in his wisdom, calls for his sword. Mothers are going, what? A sword? And Solomon declares with his sword up in the air, let's cut the baby in half and give half to each mother. Then they'll both get some. Now the one mother is saying, good idea, that'll be fine. And the other mother is saying, oh no, no, not at all. Let the baby live. She can go with the other mother. And Solomon said, okay, that proves it. The mother who was willing to give up her child so that it could have life is the real mother. And the one who complained is lost. Solomon knew how to find the truth. His wisdom grew. He built the temple that was the most glorious temple as a place of worship for Yahweh, and it became the central place where people worshipped for centuries. It was there until the people went into exile in 587. This is almost 600 years later. And Solomon is the one who keeps the kingdom moving and growing. God gives answers to us when we ask for wisdom. That promise is still here for us today. So use your wisdom. Use the wisdom that God is giving to you. Now the next thing I want to talk about is thirsting for the wonder of God. We have this sense that God is present, that God is wisdom, that God gives us a sense of what he is about and what his will is all about. But I think sometimes we don't pay enough attention to our thirst for mystery and wonder. Tonight, we have communion. Communion is a very special meal, a sacramental meal. We have bread and we have wine. We celebrate it as the body and blood of Christ. We talk as Lutherans about Luther's way of understanding this sacrament, and there are many complicated things about it because not every church has exactly the same nuance about it all. But Lutherans are strong in their understanding that in the bread and in the wine, which we take in and taste and thirst for in our celebration of communion, is also the real presence of the mystical, mysterious, supernatural body of our heavenly Christ that comes into us and feeds our soul. Luther says that when we gather together in worship, when we remember the story of the words of institution when Jesus was with his disciples and gave us this bread and wine, and when the people come forward and receive this body and blood, it is in the distribution, in the faith of the community that unites us as one body under the head of Jesus Christ, and our soul is fed and nourished, and our thirst is quenched. We really get bread and wine. We really get the body and blood of the mystical, wonderful, supernatural, mysterious, wonderful Jesus Christ. And it is with this bread of life that we have the promise of eternal life. That's what Jesus was talking about when he was together with the disciples and with the people from Jerusalem that were asking him all the questions about bread. They'd been fed with bread and fish in a feeding of the 5,000. They wanted more of that kind of bread that would keep them alive from day to day. But Jesus says the real bread isn't something that sustains us in our body functions, although we need that. The real bread is the presence of God in this life here that comes into us and abides in us, and we become part of Jesus and Jesus becomes part of us. So he says some pretty extraordinary things to those Jews. He says, I'm the bread of life. You have to eat of me in order to have eternal life. And they're going, oh, wait a minute, we don't, Jews, drink blood. That's forbidden. And how are you going to eat flesh, for goodness sakes? That's cannibalistic, that's awful. We can't do that. How's it going to work? But Jesus says very truly, it is the thirsting in our souls. It is the taking in of the wonder of it all, of the mystery of it all. It is the not understanding that's important here. It is the faith and the trust instead that brings us to this table. It says Jesus is really here, that Jesus is really in us just like he promised. And it feeds our soul in the deepest places of our lives and strengthens us and takes us out into a world and changes everything. The bread of life is indeed Jesus. And we thirst for it, and we come for it. And when we see it and we feel it and we know it, others seem to want it too. There's a story about some church leaders. They were gathering for a vote, and the highest bishop came and said, I have some good news and some bad news for you, some things to ponder. And they were talking about the Lord's Prayer. They were talking about things that were important in this life of the church. And the bishop said, you know, we've had some people from one of the famous fast food places come to us. And they said, if you could please just change the words in the Lord's Prayer to give us this day our daily chicken, we will guarantee an offering to the church of $1 billion every year. So that's the good news, said the bishop. We have a promise. And then people are saying, yeah, that's the good news. That's tremendous. We could go a long way and we could get a lot done with an offering that big. Give us this day our daily chicken. And they're actually thinking about it. And then they say, what's the bad news? Well, said the bishop, the bad news is we'll probably lose the Wonder Bread account. Oh, yeah, we grow. Not so wise. But that whole piece is the generosity of God. He tells us to laugh at ourselves, to think about the generosity of his gifts and his provision. It's no accident that we say in the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. It's not just grace for the meal. It is that yearning for the soul that is filled, that is the bread of life, that is the thirsting for the risen Lord, that gives us the assurance of the promise of everlasting life that we will never, ever lose. One last thought. There was an old man who spent most of his time on his front porch, rocking in his rocking chair, staring intently out at the world and looking and thirsting and hungering after a sign from God. He sat every day and he prayed, Lord, I'm thirsting for you, Lord. I want you so much. I need a sign. Please, Lord, fill my thirst. And then one day, a little girl was playing ball across the way, had her ball fall into his yard, and she ran in and picked up the ball, and she looked at the man and said, I see you sitting here rocking every day. I'm Lizzie. What are you doing? And the old man said, oh, you'd never understand. You're too young. You're not wise enough. And she said, well, try me. My mother says I'm pretty smart sometimes. And the man said, well, I'm thirsting for God. I need desperately some kind of a sign before I'm gone, that God is real. And they get a promise. I'm looking for a sign. I can't see it. So I'm watching, thirsting, and waiting. And Lizzie says, well, if you're looking for something monumental, you're looking in the wrong place. Because God is everywhere, not just a sign. God is in the air you breathe. And the man said, yeah, but there's more to it than that. I need something big, something I can get my hands around, something that will show me everlasting life. And Lizzie said, close your eyes. Breathe. Imagine the sunset. Smell the flowers. Think about the mountains and the trees. Think about every child that is born. Think about the taste of bread and wine. Think about the little things like the voice of a child. Mom always said, share, 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 and I'm saying what I think because God is everywhere. Don't look for a sign. If you're looking for something monumental, you have to close your eyes. You won't find it in the looking. That is where our gift is, my friends. In the inner places of the heart. It is not in the big things. It is not in those miracles that change life, that struck us with awe and change your lives. It is the taste of bread and wine when we face the wonder of God, when we embrace the mystery, when we don't have answers, and we simply put ourselves in trust with God. Jesus Christ, the bread of life. Those who come to him will not hunger. Jesus Christ, the risen Lord. Those who come to him and trust in him will not thirst. Amen. Let us turn to our next hymn. I am the bread of life.